Okay, thermodynamics in agriculture. Thermodynamics is a very interesting field. It's somewhat abstract. It borrows from both physics and chemistry. Here you have a statement: all matter contains energy. So whenever matter undergoes a change, the quantity of energy that the matter contains also changes. And I like this graphic. This is a representation of the whole universe, which is defined here as both matter and energy. Energy takes on many forms. And here you have representation of both potential and kinetic energy. The interplay of matter and energy has an enormous impact on society. Fuels release energy to warm buildings. Fertilizers help crops convert solar energy into food. Metal wires increase the flow of electrical energy. Fibers in clothing limit the flow of thermal energy away from our bodies. And of course, the illustration here is the business of heating or cooling a house, which involves changing the states of energy. Thermodynamics is the study of energy and its transformations. Heat and work. Thermodynamics is about heat and work. Energy transferred from system to surroundings, or vice versa, appears in two forms. That energy may be transferred as heat energy. Heat, or thermal energy, is the energy transferred as a result of a difference in temperature between the system and the surroundings. Work represents all other forms of energy transfer which involve some type of work. The energy transferred when an object is moved by a force. For example, when you kick a football. Thermochemistry, which is a subset of thermodynamics. Thermochemistry is the branch of thermodynamics that deals with heat in chemical and physical change. And in the graphic here, we say this slightly differently. Thermodynamics is the science of the relationship between heat and other forms of energy. Thermochemistry is the study of the quantity of heat absorbed or evolved by chemical reactions. We will primarily be addressing thermochemistry today, especially as we begin that section of our presentation where we outline the applications and the management in agriculture related to thermodynamics. Thermochemistry. Again, this is related to heat. Exothermic reactions. This is a reaction that releases heat to the surrounding. The temperature of the surroundings will increase. And here you can see an outline of that. As opposed then is an endothermic reaction. This is a reaction that absorbs heat from the surroundings. The temperature of the surroundings will decrease. And here you see a graphic representing that. So an exothermic, if this flask and the liquid that's in the flask represent a system, and everything outside the flask represents the surroundings. Under this principle of thermochemistry, an exothermic reaction is when heat moves from the system into the surroundings. That's exothermic. Exothermic reactions give off heat. They release heat to the surrounding. For example, when a gas becomes a liquid, it releases heat. The more common description for this is condensation. Condensation is an example of an exothermic reaction. When a liquid becomes a solid, this is also called freezing. As a liquid becomes a solid, it gives off heat. This is another example of an exothermic reaction. When gas becomes a solid, it gives off heat. This is referred to as deposition. These changes require cooling. In order to cool off, the heat they contain must be given off. So we refer to this in thermochemistry as an exothermic event. Endothermic reactions. They absorb heat. In this graphic, you'll see here a cold pack. This is the cold. Foot is inflamed, has a problem. The heat, reducing the heat in the foot is a good idea. So the cold is there to absorb the heat. So the heat moves from the foot, which is the system, into the cold pack. And this is an example of an endothermic. Cooking of the egg. The heat that is being generated here is transferred to the egg. The egg is absorbing heat. This is an example of the egg, the system in this case, absorbing heat. This is an endothermic reaction. Plants absorb heat. Heat comes in sunlight in that spectrum of light called infrared. Plants take in infrared spectrum of light. Heat is represented in light in the infrared spectrum. Plants absorb heat as a result, and photosynthesis is then considered an endothermic event. There's a different concept, a thermodynamic equilibrium. Thermal equilibrium is obtained when touching objects within a system reach the same temperature. When thermal equilibrium is reached, the system loses its ability to do work. This is an example of a thermal equilibrium. Object number one, object number two, each have a thermometer connected to them, and the thermometers are reading the same temperature in each of these systems, object one, object two. Zeroth law of thermodynamics. It would be interesting to discover who came up with that word zero. A very odd word. The zeroth law of thermodynamics. If two systems are separately found to be in thermal equilibrium with a third system, the first two systems are in thermal equilibrium with the other. Fairly simple concept, really. Again, we have two objects, in this case, object two, object three, but there is an intermediary object, in this case, the thermometer, which is connected to both of them. And in that environment, these two systems are thought to be in equilibrium when the thermometer stops changing. So over time, when you have two systems connected to each other, one is at 100 degrees, one is at 0 degrees, they will by force of nature, by thermodynamic principle, especially the thermochemistry reactions or events. Heat will move from the most highest levels of heat to the lesser levels of heat. Heat moves in that direction until the two systems obtain an equilibrium. In this case, 50-50. This takes time, but the forces of nature are at work everywhere in the universe, producing this result under these principles of thermochemistry. In the study of thermodynamics, the first step is to define the system. For example, a cell is a system, and the neighboring cells and the extracellular fluid is the surrounding. A galaxy can be a system, and the neighboring galaxies are the surroundings. A system plus the surroundings equals the whole universe. So this is a very universal principle. It is not limited to our planet. It's not limited to our solar system. Because it is described as universal, it is
no, Kitty, no.
Throughout the entire universe. Everyone should plan to mute their microphones who are connected to the webinar here today. Okay, here is another illustration describing three types of systems. This is a test tube with fluid in the test tube. And in this case, without the lid on the top of the test tube, it's referred to as an open system. And of course, we have heat transfer in either direction, whether it's endothermic or exothermic. In a closed system, there is a lid, but you still have heat transfer. In an isolated system, the test tube has the lid, plus it is insulated, which means that the endothermic and exothermic reactions, these events of heat moving from the system to the surroundings, has been blocked by insulation. So it's called an isolated system. Because the universe consists of only systems and surroundings, a change in the energy of the system must be accompanied by an equal and opposite change in the energy of the surroundings. This is a very fundamental principle in chemistry and also in physics, and one of the most important lessons to learn from this presentation here today. I want to read it again. Because the universe consists of only a system and its surroundings, a change in the energy of the system must be accompanied by an equal and opposite change in the energy of the surroundings. An example here, if this is hot water, boiled water, in this case, in this situation, water is the system. The surroundings in the room have a certain temperature. The water has a certain temperature. Over time, this boiling water will evolve through the loss of heat into the surroundings until the water and the ambient air temperature are at the same temperature. Heat transfer. In this case, we're looking at an endothermic event. The previous one was an exothermic, where the system was losing water. In this case, the water is in a solid form, in this case, ice. Your hand is warm. As the heat from your hand moves into the ice, the solid form of water, it is reduced to a liquid like this. Okay, this is an example of an endothermic event, a reaction between the hand and the ice. And if anyone can tell me why there is an insect embedded in this ice cube, I would give them $100 US. That is a very odd part of this graphic. When a system absorbs energy, the surroundings release it. And when a system releases energy, the surroundings absorb it. Energy is often converted from one form to another during transfers. So we have primarily been talking about heat energy here in the last few slides. But now let's make the situation a little more complicated and refer to the fact that these reactions and the corresponding heat are often cause a change in the form of energy, okay? When gasoline burns in a car engine, the reactor releases energy that is transferred as heat and work. Heat warms the car, and mechanical energy turns the car's wheels. That energy is converted into electrical energy of the sound system, the radiant energy of the headlights, and the chemical energy of the battery. The sum of all of these forms equals the change in energy between reactants and products as the gasoline is burned. I'm going to repeat that sentence. The sum of all these forms of equals the change in energy between reactants and product as the gasoline is burned. Photosynthesis, an endothermic event. During photosynthesis, green plants convert solar energy into the chemical energy of the bonds in starch plus oxygen. When an animal digests the starch from the plant, the bonds in the compound are converted into muscular or mechanical energy needed to run a marathon. The law of energy conservation. This is the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy is always conserved. The total energy of the system and surroundings remains always constant. The total energy of the system and surroundings remains always constant. This is a very important part of the principles of thermodynamics, is the conservation of energy. Energy cannot be created, it cannot be destroyed. An example, the law of conservation of energy. Energy is transferred from the ball to the pins. No energy is lost. Another example, this is electrical energy, which is then converted to light energy and heat energy. And the amount of energy, quantitatively speaking, in heat and light from the light bulb is exactly equal to the electrical energy that was delivered to the light bulb. Just another example of the fact that energy cannot be created or destroyed. Okay, we're going to play a short video here on the first law of thermodynamics.
Hello there, it's the Easy Engineering once again, and today's topic is the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics says that heat is a form of energy, and as what all other forms of energy is subject to, it follows the law of conservation of energy. So what does this mean? It means that heat energy also cannot be created nor destroyed and can only be transferred to one form or another. Don't overthink this too much. This law is all about heat as energy and follows the law of conservation of energy. And that's it. Now to appreciate the application of this law, let's try a very good one example. This coal is just a type of rock, right? But for scientists, this rock contains an energy that produced heat energy when it undergoes a complete combustion. Actually, some power plant utilizes this coal to generate electrical energy, or what we call as electricity. What they do is that they feed this coal into a boiler furnace, and with an assistance of oxygen and a little heat, this creates a combustion in a form of heat energy. Now, the heat energy will transfer its energy to water above it, making it into a steam. And the steam will rotate a turbine, and that's a mechanical energy right there. And then, this turbine will rotate a generator, which converts that energy into electrical energy. See that just by knowing this law, you can do so much. And that's it. This is Easy Engineering. See you again for our other easy and fun engineering topics. Easy Engineering, engineering topics made easy and fun for you.
Now we're going to move along and begin to discuss thermodynamics from the point of view of agricultural systems. And in this first presentation, there's a lot of information on the slide, but it's important to understand as we approach the process of comprehending agriculture as a system, we want to point out, and this graphic helps us, the connectivity of agriculture to all its parts. So this represents the farms, and these are the industry inputs that go into farming. There are food companies and distributors and retailers, consumers, and waste. Waste goes to landfills or it might be recycled. This represents sort of a circular system, or it represents, more importantly, the connectivity of many different moving parts in the world of agriculture. We utilize natural resources, land, soils, water, and biology. We also have impacts on the environment in any agricultural system. Those impacts may include greenhouse gases, that may include water as a byproduct of agricultural systems. And of course, very important to that is the quality of the water that we release into the environment. In approaching the subject of an agricultural system, I present this slide in order to highlight the fact that there are many aspects of science that are critical and integral to understanding agricultural systems. In general, we would say the agricultural sciences, sciences related to water, biology or biodiversity, climatic sciences, landforms, geology, evolution, ecology, meteorology, geomorphology, physiology of an animal or a plant. Physiology means the chemistry of an animal or the chemistry of a plant. Basic chemistry, basic physics, molecular biology, thermodynamics, physics. So in this case, the course that we're teaching now is about the role of the chemical sciences, chemistry, and agriculture. And as a subset of that, we're looking today at thermodynamics, which is an integral part of both chemistry and physics. So there's a complex consideration, scientific consideration, which helps define, underlie, and helps us manage what we understand as systems in agriculture. It's important for the student of agriculture and the practitioner of agriculture and the manager of agricultural industries to have at least a reasonable level of understanding about these scientific disciplines. Everything is connected. In this case, we see here humans, life, chemistry, physical energy, chemical energy. We have solar radiation. We have radiation from the earth back into the atmosphere. Temperature, or the measurement of the quantity of heat in the system. In this case, the planet is the system, planet Earth. And what we're dealing with is many influences that influence temperature on the planet being the system in this case. And it is the interconnectivity that we wish to emphasize here about the system. And in studying any system, whether it be a physical or a chemical system, a biological system, an agricultural system, a planetary system, a galactic system, a solar system, any system involves understanding the interconnectivity between the different elements of the system. And we utilize the scientific disciplines, as mentioned before, to approach that understanding. It is for us an eternal process of discovery. Here we have a graphic that presents our life as human beings as relates to natural cycles. And an open energy system is represented by the sun hitting our planet, and it comes in and it bounces off of the biosphere or the atmosphere back into outer space. The matter on the planet, it is not going anywhere. It doesn't disappear. It is uncontained matter, and it moves and spreads within the biosphere of the planet and the lithosphere. In this case, the biosphere is made up of plants and animals. I like the reference here to photosynthesis by plants. They would say that photosynthesis is the engine for life and cleans the system. It's a very interesting approach to understanding the role of photosynthesis in the biology of life on the planet. In the middle here, we see sustainability is about the ability of human society to continue indefinitely within these natural cycles. Okay, so let's repeat that. Sustainability, our ability to continue as a life form on this planet, is about the ability of human society to continue indefinitely within these natural cycles. Our ability to survive on this planet depends heavily on us figuring out how to continue indefinitely. And that actually brings up a reference to time. And it invokes infinity of time. So if we plan to be around for a long time on this planet, we have to learn how to live within these natural cycles that are referred to here, that are significant to the lithosphere, the biosphere, and the planet itself, as well as the plant and animal world. We all have to learn to get along together. There is an economy to this process. This economy is very, very important. And it begins the process here of discussing what it means to manage our existence and our systems that we utilize to maintain ourselves as humans, that those things that we manage, the natural resources that we utilize, and it also reflects something about nature. Okay, let's look at this graphic. So it is broken on a linear basis here, horizontally, conventional, green, sustainable, restorative, or regenerative. You could think of those as the philosophical approaches to the business of managing energy. Okay. And the more conventional is somewhat, it is argued here that it is more degenerating. It is mechanistic by design. It is a reductionist style of thinking where the parts are emphasized and exploiting, mining, taking advantage of the parts without regard for the whole system. As we move along the line to green, sustainable, restorative, and ultimately to regenerative, we are shifting the way we think, the way we act, and we're beginning to create a more holistic approach to the management of energy. And we're beginning to think more in terms of patterns instead of mechanistic designs. These designs are, by definition, by demonstration, they're borrowed from nature. They are borrowed from nature. It is argued here that nature itself functions quite efficiently with regard to its energy management systems. And we have the obligation to learn how nature works. So in this process of managing energy, we know that the more degenerative approach in this area here requires more energy, typically. It requires more materials in order to produce a result. On the other hand, the more regenerative approach, managing energy to managing opportunity, involves less energy and less materials. So from an economics point of view, it's more efficient to think about managing our opportunities on the planet in a more regenerative fashion, in a more holistic fashion, system that replicates and duplicates what Mother Nature has already engineered over literally billions of years. Let's talk about farmers. Farmers are managers of thermodynamics in a farm management system. It means that they manage both energy and matter and the relationships between energy and matter and the transformations that take place in the reactions between matter and energy. So in this case, we're looking at, in order to improve a productivity, a farmer manages productivity. They manage conservation of soil and water. Their job is to protect sensitive habitats. Their job is to preserve the forest. Farmers have a very large responsibility on our planet. They manage a large part of our planet, whether farming in the oceans or farming on the terrestrial land surfaces. System in agriculture. We have inputs and we have outputs. In between the inputs and the outputs, there is a process. And in this case, what is presented are subsystems that exist in agriculture, whether it be animal production, plant production, decomposition systems, farms, family systems, the labor side of agriculture. So here we have biology, here we have the human resource, here we have animals, here we have plants. There is a perpetual, ongoing, never-ending interrelationship between all of these systems. It is circular by nature. Also, animals and plants have a direct linear relationship with each other. And this is basically studying the agricultural sciences, in this case, crop science, animal science, and then the biologies that are related to both. Let's look at the economics of energy in agriculture. So this line at the bottom, the horizontal line, represents input of energy. The vertical line is energy output from the agricultural system. And the key things to look at here that are operational and functional in this graphic are maximum energy, maximum efficiency, and maximum yield. The green line represents income from the system. The red line represents the environmental cost for the system. In order to move an agricultural system from the point of maximum efficiency to maximum yield, whether it be an animal or a plant, this is realizing maximum yield represents realizing the full genetic potential of the animal or the plant. So in this case, to move from this level of output to this level of output, right here, after passing the point of maximum efficiency, this is where waste begins to occur. This is where the economics of energy begins to produce a diminishing rate of return. And this is reflected in the energy output, which begins to decline relative to input. It is reflected in the income from the system, which begins to become more flat as you strive to move from maximum efficiency to maximum yield. And a very important part of this consideration is the environmental impact. As you can see, at maximum efficiency, it is argued here that the environmental cost is very low. But as you push from maximum efficiency to maximum yield, there is an expense to the environment. The next slide brings this argument to a very specific macro element utilized in crop production. And in this case, it's nitrogen. So here we have on the horizontal line, kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. This is actual nitrogen. This is not a fertilizer of ammonium, monoammonium phosphate. This is not urea. This is not anhydrous ammonia. This is the actual nitrogen that's contained in those fertilizers. So this is the delivery of nitrogen per hectare compared to the kilograms of corn that are produced per hectare. So this is the output side, this is the input side. You have a similar graphic that's represented here In the case of nitrogen, which is arguably a form of energy that you deliver into the corn production system. And again, you see a similar pattern. Approximately here is the point of maximum efficiency. Maximum efficiency. This point is maximum yield or maximum productivity. And you see the same slopes with regard to income. You begin to have a point of diminishing return. And you can even go past that by oversupplying nitrogen to the field. And the same is true for yield. Too much nitrogen and your yield will actually go down. You will hurt the crop. And again, this cost of pollution. This is a relatively complex analysis, and it involves many factors. It involves soil science. It involves crop genetics. It involves economics and the analysis therein. But this cost of pollution is very significant because in this case, in the practical sense, we're talking about the loss of nitrogen from the system into the rivers, into the oceans. And this is a form of contamination. And it has very detrimental effects on the environment. And so the loss of nitrogen in this case is not a very healthy thing for our planet. And we in agriculture are really guilty of pushing the envelope in our farm management systems and pushing past the point of maximum efficiency, attempting to reach the point of maximum productivity. But in that process, we tend to produce a lot of negative side effects. This is what this looks like. This is actually loss of nitrogen as a form of energy that you're putting into the crop production system for corn. And it is a loss of that energy as pollution into the environment. The management of farm systems should be such, ideally, to avoid this loss of nitrogen, to understand the point of maximum efficiency, and to understand in farm management what it means to produce a diminishing economic return from the system, and ultimately understand what it means to prevent pollution. This is our responsibility in farm management. Farmers manage thermal chemistry as relates to heat energy. This management involves managing an exothermic event or an endothermic event. Exothermic is where the system releases heat. Endothermic, the system takes on heat. Greenhouse tomatoes suffer from heat. The system is the greenhouse and the tomatoes. Surroundings is the space outside the greenhouse. If it's too hot in your greenhouse, you need to do something about that. It's not only bad for the tomatoes, but as you can see here, it's not that pleasant for the people either. Ventilation is one of the solutions. In this case, an exothermic management response to the greenhouse heat problem for the tomato. So this ventilation represents an exothermic response. So the heat may escape the system. The greenhouse is the system. The surrounding ambient environment is the surroundings. Another one is to use electrical energy. which is then converted to mechanical energy, which is the fan turning, which is an exhaust fan to remove the heat from the greenhouse. This is a very interesting system. The brown area that you see here is what's called an evaporative panel. An evaporative panel. And they're utilized in greenhouses in areas of the world where it is really hot. How does it work? This is an example of an endothermic reduction of heat. In this case, as we can see, we have the greenhouse. The air from the surroundings is being pulled through the greenhouse by these fans. The air coming in is 37 degrees centigrade in this example. The air moving through the greenhouse is 28 degrees centigrade. The cooling pad here has water moving through the pad. It is delivered at the top of the pad. It moves by gravity down to the bottom where it is recollected, pumped underground where it is cooled off, and then it is pumped back out to be recycled again through the cooling pad. In this case, the endothermic event is the water, in this case is the system. The air moving through is the surroundings, which are very hot. The endothermic event is the water absorbing the heat out of the air. So this is endothermic management of heat for your tomato greenhouse. It's an excellent system. You see it in the Sahara Desert. You see it in Saudi Arabia. You see it in the Emirates. You see it in any climate that is really hot, where hot air is a big problem. You might see it in the United States, in Southern California or Arizona. This is what this looks like. Greenhouse in the desert. I have been to greenhouses like this where the farmers, the farm operation, the system of agriculture involved 100 hectares like this, 100 hectares of greenhouses like this. The engineering, the management of thermodynamics in such a system, absolutely critical. If you make a mistake and you fail, and heat is not managed properly in such systems, you lose the crop. The tomatoes will stop pollinating themselves and producing fruit. That's the first thing that happens. And obviously, that's the most critical thing. Because if you're investing money to raise the tomato crop and you allow the tomatoes to get too hot and they stop pollinating the flowers, there's no fruit set, flowers fall off even, then your investment turns into a loss. Another way of controlling the heat is to block it. As we mentioned before, sunlight, the spectrum of light from the sun contains an infrared, which is a particular frequency of the light. And it is the infrared frequency in the light spectrum that is heat energy from the sun. You can block that heat energy from reaching your greenhouse by using a shade cloth. And just like a shade tree, you have some relief. It's always cooler under the shade tree. So in this case, you not only are blocking the infrared spectrum from the light, but you are reducing the UV light that reaches the plant as well. And many plants are not that tolerant of excessive amounts of UV light, and they like to grow in shade. So a shade cloth is a friendly component to greenhouse management, and if you have a greenhouse, you should understand the role of a shade cloth and the corresponding thermodynamics. Here's another example of managing heat in agriculture. In this case, we're going to talk about corn. Corn plays a temperature plays a significant role in the development and maturity rate of crops. A good indicator of potential maturity is growing degree days. Corn heat units, CHU, is a measurement of cumulative heat over the growing season. Very interesting concept. It is an integral part of understanding agronomy, the management of crops and soils. Heat units are a measured quantity in the management of crops. Here's the formula for corn heat units. And you can see the mathematical formula for calculating CHU, corn heat units. It's a relatively complex formula. It's very interesting how this formula was discovered. Obviously, a relatively abstract exercise was entertained and executed to develop an understanding of corn, physiology of corn, and the relationship of corn physiology to the availability of heat, which is measured on a daily basis. And there is a cumulative amount of heat required to produce and maintain and bring to maturity different genomes of corn. The genomes of corn are not all the same with regard to the required heat units. Here's a map of what this looks like in the United States. In the more southern areas of the United States, we have a lot more heat units. In the northern parts of the United States, almost half the quantity of heat units compared to the southern area. Yet we grow corn in this entire region, which is the Mississippi River drainage basin. It covers a large part of the middle of the United States. And this is the Corn Belt in the United States. Different genomes are adapted to these different growing zones, especially and most especially because of the heat units that are available in those zones. So in the northern zone, a corn crop will be a corn that grows to maturity in a shorter number of days, which means that it will need less heat units to bring the corn crop to maturity. In the southern zones, the genomes that are utilized are adapted to longer growing or more heat units that are required to bring them to maturity. And you have a longer growing season here as well. So these heat units basically dictates the genomes that you can select in growing corn in this zone of the United States. Now let's jump to animals. Heat stress in an animal is of paramount importance in animal science. Managing heat stress in animals is one of the most critical management considerations in taking care of animals in an agricultural system. Visible signs of heat stress for dairy cows. The visible signs: higher body temperature, reduced EMI, reduced cud chewing, increased respiratory rate. The metabolic system actually increases. Lower milk yield, higher SCC. The invisible signs: decreased conception. It's more difficult to breed your animals if they are suffering from heat stress. Lower immunity. There are disease problems. Increased risk of mastitis, which is a bacterial infection in the mammary gland of a dairy cow or any mammal. The mammary gland is subject to a bacterial infection called mastitis. And heat stress will increase the occurrence of mastitis in the mammary gland. Increased risk of acidosis. This is the rumen becoming too acidic. Decreased rumen function. And the rumen is the first stomach in a cow. And the cow has 4 stomachs. The first one is the rumen. It's like a huge fermenter. And if it becomes too acidic, you have poor digestion, poor absorption of the nutrients that you're putting into the cow. What does that mean to the farm management system? It means loss of money. Increased maintenance energy, increased risk for lameness. Managing heat in a dairy animal, in any animal, is extra critical in the farm management system. So your cows can suffer from too much heat. Here's a solution. In this case, what's happening? The water system is absorbing heat from the cow. What would we call this? The water is a system which is experiencing an endothermic event. It is absorbing heat from the cow. The cow knows how to cool itself off. It takes a swim in the local pond or the lake. Here's another system, shade. You see all the cows are standing in the shaded area. Why? Because they're trying to escape the infrared spectrum of light from the sun. The infrared spectrum of light from the sun is heat energy from. Also, in this case, they're using evaporative cooling. They're putting a mist onto the cows, and they're using fans to move air across the cows. But in this case, it's exothermic event. The cows are giving off the heat into the environment, into the surroundings, which have wind and it has moisture to absorb that heat. Chickens suffer from heat. In any farm management system that involves chickens, managing heat is super critical. Heat stress for chicken, decreased activity, less feed intake, nutrient deficiencies, panting, respiratory alkalosis, acid-base imbalances, decreased performance, poor efficiency, increased mortality, low profits in the farm management system. Heat can be, especially in animal production systems, in the warm time of the year, in the hot time of the year. Heat is an enemy to the profitability in a farm management system. Managing heat is a thermodynamic event. Specifically, it's a thermochemistry event. If you grow chickens in an environment like this, the probability of heat stress is very high. Stress in these animals can kill the animals. It can make the animals unhealthy. Would you like to eat animals that are coming out of this kind of an environment, that are subjected to potential levels of stress that are associated with overcrowding in a contained environment? Or would you prefer to eat chickens that have space, have less stress in their life, where the environment of the chicken does not allow the chicken to take on heat. The heat is easily moved from the chicken into the surroundings, into the ambient environment. These are free-range chickens, as opposed to chickens that are grown in confinement. Confinement chickens versus free-range chickens. I think I would prefer to be consuming chickens and the eggs from the chicken, which are free-range, less stress, happier chickens, healthier chickens. And in the farm management system, controlling heat stress on the chicken is an important component in producing a profitable chicken operation. Farmers manage heat in crops, in animals, in the environment, and also for the planet. All of these things are linked together. There is connectivity in our life between all aspects of our existence. And in the world of a farmer, farmers on our planet have one of the greater responsibilities for thermodynamically managing the environment that we live in. And they do so involving the production of food, feed, and fiber, utilizing crops, our plants, and animals. And as such, this directly influences the environment and the whole planet and the quality of our existence and our ability as humans on the planet to maintain and sustain an indefinite opportunity to coexist with the cycles of nature. This is an interesting video clip where a presentation is made about converting waste to fuel on farms. It's a question of economy and waste management. This is not very big.
So the biodigester system is actually quite simple. You can think of it like the stomach of a cow. Raw material goes in. Inside, basically all the work is done by bacteria. The oldest form of life on Earth is a single-cell bacteria that actually evolved before there was free oxygen. So it lives in this environment, breaking down the organic waste, and its only byproduct is methane gas. And so that gas is what we capture, and in very, very simple tubing, we can run it straight to someone's home so that they can cook, or we can run it into an engine to produce mechanical or electrical energy. And the byproduct is basically now all that same organic material, but in its purest form, broken down into the raw nutrients that can be used as a fertilizer. Anything that smells bad is basically a good opportunity for us to make a radical change. That smell is an inefficiency. You would never find that smell in nature because something would have already moved in to take care of that waste. And so what we do is basically go to places that smell bad and we make them not smell bad anymore and turn all that waste into a resource that can be used. Our original work was in Mexico, which is this amazing laboratory. There's all these different climates, all these different farm types, and we basically realized from there that we could work all around the world. And so developing countries are predominantly agrarian still. There's probably on the order of about 400 million farmers, so that's on the order of about 2 billion people. About 1 in 3 people today actually work in farming and could be impacted by this. So we could radically change the food system, we could radically change the way that people fertilize their farms, take care of the soil, and power their homes.
Okay, we want to thank you for your participation today. This is a presentation on agricultural and thermodynamics and thermochemistry. We look forward to presenting again next Friday, and Kelly will send a notice to everyone by email about the events and copies of the recordings and the PowerPoints. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye for now.